My name is Ava, and this story happened just a few months ago, but it changed my entire life. At the time, I was working two jobs. Mornings at a bakery and evenings as a waitress at one of the fanciest restaurants in Manhattan. The kind of place where people don't just eat, they perform being rich. Most of the guests barely looked at me. They'd wave their hands to get water, or throw down black credit cards without even making eye contact. But I didn't mind. I was there to earn tips and pay for nursing school, not to make friends that night. A father came in with his son, around 12 years old. The boy had a wheelchair and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. They sat in my section, so I took their order. The father was polite, kind, almost too kind for this place. The boy couldn't stop watching the stage area. A jazz trio was playing softly, and the boy kept tapping his fingers on the table to the beat. Then he turned to his dad and whispered something. The father nodded, smiled gently, and then looked up at me. "Miss, would it be all right if my son danced a little?" "He really loves music," I blinked, unsure. The restaurant was elegant. There was no dancing, but the floor was nearly empty. And something about the boy's eyes made it impossible to say no. "Of course," I said. "In fact, I'll dance with him." So I did. I held the arms of his wheelchair gently and spun him in slow circles, matching the rhythm of the music. He laughed, really laughed, in a way that made the entire room pause. People turned and stared, some smiled. A few shook their heads, but I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for a tip. I wasn't doing it for attention. I was doing it because if it were my little brother, I'd want someone to do the same. What I didn't know was that someone was watching us, very, very closely. As I wheeled the boy back to his table, his cheeks were glowing. His father placed a hand on my shoulder and said, quietly, "Thank you. You have no idea what this meant." I smiled politely and continued with my shift. In my head, I was already thinking about the long subway ride home, the cold leftovers in my fridge, and the exam I had to study for the next day. About 30 minutes later, as I was clearing another table, the restaurant manager approached me with a strange look. "Ava, Mr. Lancaster would like to speak with you in private." Mr. Lancaster. That's when I realized who the man really was. William Lancaster, real estate tycoon, billionaire, owner of half the luxury buildings on the East Coast. His face had been on magazine covers, and I just danced with his son. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine. My first thought was great. I broke some weird high society rule, and now I'm getting fired. I followed the manager into one of the VIP lounges, where Mr. Lancaster and his son were waiting. The boy smiled at me, still holding the tiny restaurant napkin I gave him as a souvenir. Mr. Lancaster motioned for me to sit. "You're studying to become a nurse, correct?" My heart skipped a beat. Why? "Yes," I started. "How did you?" I asked your manager. "He also said you've never once been late, never complained, and often stay late without asking for overtime." I nodded slowly, unsure what was happening. Then he leaned in and said something I'll never forget. "I've spent billions building towers, companies, cities. But tonight you built something I couldn't. A moment of joy for my son." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a golden embossed card and handed it to me. "This is a number of my personal assistant. Tomorrow she set up a scholarship in your name. Full ride tuition, housing, books, all covered. You'll never have to wait tables again. Unless you want to. I sat there in silence. I didn't know whether to cry, thank him, or run. I managed a quiet "Thank you, sir." He just smiled and said, "Don't thank me. Thank your heart, that's what got you here." That night I didn't take the train home. Mr. Lancaster's driver took me in a black SUV, with seats softer than my bed. The driver handed me an envelope before I stepped out. Inside a check. $10,000 just to thank you, he said. I stood in front of my tiny apartment for 10 minutes, just holding it. No words, just disbelief. The next morning the calls began. The assistant confirmed everything. She even asked if I had a passport, because they were planning to send me to a private nursing program in Switzerland that included travel rotations across Europe. That's when I realized this wasn't a dream. It was my new reality the following week. I returned to the restaurant one last time, not in a uniform but in a white blouse and heels I borrowed from a friend. My coworkers looked at me like I was a different person. And maybe I was. I wasn't just Ava the waitress anymore. I was Ava, the girl who danced with a boy in a wheelchair and changed the course of her life. As I walked past the table where it all began, the jazz trio started playing the same soft tune. A familiar rhythm. I smiled. That moment reminded me of something. Kindness doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. And sometimes someone powerful is watching. I was sitting on the rooftop of a hospital in Geneva, overlooking the Swiss Alps. The air was cold, clean, and so far from the greasy kitchen air I once breathed in Manhattan. I had just finished assisting in my first real operation to patient, a 9-year-old boy who reminded me so much of William's son. Bright eyes, same fear of needles. Same laugh when I told a joke in a broken accent. And right there in that sterile white hallway, I understood this was always where I was meant to be. Not because of luck, not because of money, but because in one single moment, I chose kindness without expecting anything in return. 1 year later, I received a letter. No return address, just gold ink on a black envelope. Inside a photo, William's son, standing on crutches next to a physical therapist, and a note that simply read, "He dances now without wheels. Thank you, Ava W." From waitress to healer, from a quiet jazz song to a symphony of second chances. This is not just my story. This is what happens when you lead with heart, and someone powerful decides to follow. So the next time you think nobody notices, trust me, someone always does.